You are now listening to Discover Your Potential with radio talk show host Dan Gilman, Cindy Gilman's son. So listen, participate, be inspired. Know that you can discover your potential. Here is Dan Gilman.
Well, mediumship tends to be classified as either mental or physical. With mental mediumship, such a medium often can see the spirit world, the spirit people, the communicators, and this is referred to as clairaudience, the ability to see. Also, there is what is often referred to as clairaudience, and with clairaudience, the medium is able to hear the voices of the spirit people, and therefore they can pass on messages to the sitters. Now, physical mediumship is something which is entirely different. It is actually physical manifestations, and I think the best way that I can actually explain this is to perhaps describe what it is like to attend one of my seances. And for this, I shall concentrate on what I refer to as our guest seances. Now, this is where the home circle sits, the same group of people, week after week, month after month, year after year. But from time to time, we do have guests that come and sit. So if I can describe generally what takes place at such a seance. Now, the first thing I should say is that my seances, not totally, but let's say for 80-90% of the time, are held in pitch blackness, total darkness. Now, of course, I fully understand and respect the critics and the cynics that say, well, yes, these seances are held in the darkness because the medium is a fraud and he can produce these things in total darkness, touching people, moving things around. And of course, the cynics and the skeptics are perfectly correct, because in the past, there have been occasions, many occasions, where such mediums, fraudulent mediums, have been caught out in fraud by using the cover of darkness. But you see, the fact is that we know full well that in order for physical manifestations to occur, usually, not always, but usually, pitch blackness is an essential ingredient of the seance, and I shall explain why. Sure. The spirit world withdraws from the medium through the nose, the ears, the mouth, from the solar plexus, a substance, an energy, which is often referred to as ectoplasm. Now, the word ectoplasm was coined in the year 1894 by a physicist by the name of Charles Richer, and he was a Nobel Prize winning medical man. But he spent many years of his life investigating mediumship, spiritualism, physical mediumship, and it was he who coined the word ectoplasm to describe this form of energy which is extracted from the medium, from the spirit world. Now, as it leaves the medium, it's totally unsubstantial, almost like smoke, if you like, but very quickly, in ways that we don't understand, the spirit world are able to convert that energy into something very, very substantial. And physical manifestations rely and depend upon this externalized energy, ectoplasm. Now, what we do know is that if light is introduced into the room, artificial light, natural light, whatever, without permission of the spirit world, then the ectoplasm can return very, very quickly to the medium, and this can have catastrophic effects upon his health. Now, we do know of mediums in the past that have suffered terribly because somebody has switched on a light and the ectoplasm has returned full force into the medium. And we know this as an absolute fact, that mediums in the past have been badly injured, and in one case actually it led to death. But anyhow, so now the point is that at my seances, yes, they are held in total darkness, but from time to time light is introduced, but only when the spirit world requests it. So I shall describe what it's like to attend one of my physical seances. So we go up into the seance room and we sit in a circle configuration. And usually we sit and we hold hands. The light is switched off. My circle leader will then open the circle by speaking to the spirit world and inviting them in. So he speaks for a few moments, then he presses a button and soft, gentle orchestral music begins to play. Now I have to say, Dan, that throughout my many years of sitting, it is always the same piece of music that is played. And for me, I always look upon this as a trigger in some way. It's not something, trance is not something that I force upon myself. It happens as soon as the music begins to play. And so my mind has been conditioned over a period of so many, many years. And, you know, I always worry if I'm driving the car, listening to the radio, and I think if that piece of music comes on, there could be big problems. So anyhow, so that triggers my trance condition. And then the first person who speaks through me using my vocal codes is my principal guide, my chief guide, my most important guide right from the very beginning. And he is a North American Indian by the name of Whitefeather. And Whitefeather will welcome everyone to the seance, and he will speak for a few moments, and then he will step to one side. And then I will be controlled by a little boy who always gives his age of death at 6 and a bit. That's how he always says it, 6 and a bit. He died when he was 6 and a bit. Now people say, well, why a little boy? What's the purpose of that? Well, the purpose is that very often when people come along to sit with me, if they've never sat before, understandably, they can be extremely nervous. They don't really know what to expect. Well, Christopher's job, his task, is to relieve the tension. And he does this in a unique way. He's quite a character, to say at the very least. And within minutes, within seconds of him speaking through me, everyone becomes totally relaxed. And that's brilliant, because then everyone is in total harmony, all thinking in the same way, all being as one together. And that is what is required for spiritual communication to take place. Mm-hmm. After a while, when everyone has totally relaxed, he steps to one side, and then I'm controlled by a spiritual gentleman by the name of Walter. Now, students of spiritualism and psychical research will straight away recognize the name Walter Stinson. Now, I'm not going to go into lots of details about Walter, except to say that he was the principal guide of a medium back in the 1920s and 30s, a Boston medium, USA, Boston medium by the name of, well, she was known under the name of Marjorie. And she was known in spiritualist circles as the eighth wonder of the world. Her mediumship was quite extraordinary. And her brother on the other side of life was responsible for communication, for all the physical manifestations, etc., etc. Now, I do know that throughout her life as a medium in the 20s and 30s, there was a great deal of controversy constantly surrounding her. And we know that since her death in the 1930s, that books, articles, radio productions, television productions have been made about the Marjorie mediumship. And now she's generally known as the greatest psychic fraud in history. And that angers me tremendously. But I'm not going to go into lots of details as to why I'm saying that. So I shall go back to Walter. So Walter, when his sister passed into spirit, said he'd done everything he possibly could to try to demonstrate the reality of survival beyond death and of communication between the two worlds. And he said he would never, ever try again. That was it, finished. But then he heard about myself and the fact I'd studied his sister's mediumship for 50, well, at that time, 40 odd years. And he decided to try once again, one last effort to try to complete the task he commenced all those years ago. So Walter now is solely in charge of all the spiritual manifestations, the physical manifestations. Now, if I can describe to you, we use within the seance room what we refer to as trumpets. Now, these should not be confused with musical instruments, not that at all. But if people can imagine megaphones without a handle, so at the small end, probably about 1/2 inch diameter, at the large end, probably 6 inches in diameter, and the height of the trumpet is used somewhere between 12 and 15 inches. And these are usually made out of tin, thin metal, or from cardboard. We use 2 in our seance room. And at a certain point, Walter will ask for the trumpets to be placed on the floor directly in front of me. And then he will levitate the trumpets, and the 2 trumpets will fly, often at tremendous speed, all around the room. Now, pleasingly, as of a few years ago, when this happens, very often I come out of the trance condition. And this is particularly important when we have guest sitters, because then they can hear my voice and know exactly where I'm sitting, in the same place. I don't move from there. So obviously I can't be responsible for moving the trumpets around the room. Sometimes the spirits of the so-called dead are heard to speak through the trumpets. And of course, being like megaphones, then the voices are amplified, and we can have loved ones, so on, so on, so forth, speaking through the trumpets to the guest sitters. And I should also point out that throughout the seances, I have luminous tabs adhered to my knees so that everyone can see it all for the duration, for the entire seance. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be in my seat, because they can see the luminous tabs. So that's very interesting. And then I should point out that throughout the seances, when we have guest sitters, we have what's called cable ties, which secure my arms tightly to the chair arms. And at a certain point, Walter will invite someone to come and sit at my side, right-hand side. The lady who's sitting on my right will move somewhere else. The lady will sit on my right-hand side, and then Walter will say, take Stewart's right hand in yours, which she will do. Under no circumstances must you let it go. And the lady sitter will hang on to my right hand. Then he will say, with your right hand, reach out and touch Stewart's arm. Make sure that the cable tie is there and around the arm of the chair, which the lady will then do. Then he says, move your right hand away, but for goodness sake, do not let go of Stewart's hand, which he doesn't. Then he will say, because I've heard this so many times on the recordings, if I can take Stewart's arm through the cable tie, now that would be impressive. And the lady would say yes. And then with that, my arm shoots up into the air, straight through the cable tie. And then he immediately asks the lady to feel the arm of the chair to make sure that the cable tie is still there, which of course it is. Sometimes he will take the cable tie through the arm of the chair and present it to the sitter on my right hand side, and then he will take a spare cable tie from the table which is in front of me, and he will then marvelously fasten my arm again to the arm of the chair. So this can happen several times. And then we have Walter relinquishes control, and then we have a lady by the name of Frida Johnson, and then she will control me. Now, Frida's responsibility is to reconnect the sitters with their deceased loved ones. And this is what she loves to do, really loves to do. Now, I've always said, Dan, that yes, the physical manifestations are spectacular for anyone who has not experienced this, but they do not prove survival. But then if they are linked up with survival evidence, then that in its entirety puts forward a very, very strong case for survival and communication. So then she will relish the opportunity to link people up with their loved ones. And sometimes their loved ones will come and speak to their loved one in the circle. But to me, one of the most wonderful things of all that Frida does from time to time Now, you've got to remember that I've never ever met these guest sitters before. And certainly never been in their houses. Sometimes they come from all over the world to sit.
Sure.
And she will then say, when you get home, I want you to go to your bookcase. You describe where it is. I want you to, now I'm making this up because obviously I'm making this part up. I want you to go to the third shelf down from the top. I want you to count, let's say, 15 books in from the left-hand side, and there you will find a book with a red cover. Take the book out, open it to page number 100, and you will find it's a left-hand page or it's a right-hand page. Sure. Then I want you to count down from the top to the 15th line, 18th line, 10th line, or whatever, and there you will find the following words. Now, bear in mind, I've never ever met these people. I've certainly not been in the houses. What I can say is that very, very often she's 100% correct in what she says. Sometimes she's occasionally correct, and sometimes she's totally incorrect. Now, Frida's been asked many times, why is it that sometimes you're totally correct, sometimes partly, and sometimes totally wrong? And she says, I don't know. And that's the answer she always gives. She doesn't know, but she always gives of her best. Now, all the skeptics and the critics will immediately ignore that and push it to one side because there is no explanation for it, is there? There's no explanation. Right. So that happens, and then she will stand to one side, and Walter will console me again. Now, sit in front of me is a low table with a glass top. It's about, let's say, 18 inches in diameter, and it has a glass top, and inside the table there is a red light. So it will ask for the red light to be switched on. So then the top of the table, the glass top, is it totally illuminated? And he'll then ask the person, he'll invite somebody to come and sit facing me, and he'll ask them to put their hand on the table, which they will do. And then he says, I will now produce my own etheric hand from the ectoplasmic energy. And then as the person watches, they will see like a cloud appear on the tabletop, a cloud. And then little by little, it slowly but surely, it then begins to condense, and until eventually there's just a mass, and then out of the mass comes Walter's hand. And very often it will reach out to the person opposite, and he will shake the hand or tap the hand. Now, not only have we had Walter do this in the past, but we've had people's loved ones have done this in the past. We've had children who have done this in the past, tiny little hands, And I could go on and on and on. And perhaps the most wonderful thing of all, which very, very rarely happens, but it has happened in the past, is when the doctor who occasionally works through me to perform healings on people who are sitting, very occasionally he will materialize, and to all intents and purposes is a solid human being, and he will go around the circle, he will touch people, hold their hands, etc, etc, etc.
Wow.
And amazingly, and then he will collapse into the floor and disappear. So I say to skeptics and the cynics, I understand perfectly what they're thinking and where they're coming from. Of course I do. But very often, Dan, these people who make such, what can I say, make such pronouncements with such confidence, the majority, I dare say, have never, ever sat at a genuine seance, So to sit on the sidelines and make these accusations, and I have no doubt whatsoever that after I've passed into spirit, then I will be labelled as being a fraudulent medium, because all physical mediums in the past have met that fate,
right.
And I think that is so, so sad, I mean, I could speak forever about it all.
Yeah, I thought you said you have to be in total darkness, usually.
Yes, absolutely.
But they can come through outside of the darkness too, correct? They could.
Very, very rarely, but it has been done, and specifically when Walter materializes his hand on the tabletop. Now, do you remember me saying about the cable ties and my arm rising into the air through the cable ties?
Sure.
Many years ago, before we used cable ties, we used to use ropes. And on one occasion, and it's actually in my book about this, on one single occasion, Walter called for the light to be put on and for everyone to watch my right hand. And as they watched, and so my hand was absolutely bound to the chair, my arm shot up into the air and saw my arm go straight through the ropes. You know,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, absolutely. But may I also say, and I'm nearly forgot.
How can he physically do that to you? Like, how can just?
Well, you tell me. I have no idea. But as I say, a long time ago, I used to try to understand why this, why that, how's this happen? How do they do? I don't do that anymore, and I haven't done for years. I just leave it, leave it to the spirit world. Leave it. Now, can I just say one thing here, Dan,
Sure.
before we move on?
Yeah.
Now, for people who know nothing about physical mediumship or very, very little, I understand fully that this may all seem very, very strange, to say the least. Okay. And it's very difficult for me as the medium, very often I'm in the trance condition, to explain and to describe. But some years ago, we had a lady begin to sit with us who was totally deaf. And I said this in the last interview.
Yes.
And then the spirit world said that she had great work to do, and it was important that she should be able to hear. So from then on, whenever she sat, she would feel at the beginning of the seance, she described it as like a bonnet rolled onto her head, and then she could hear. So years later, and she became an honorary member of the circle. Her name is Katie Halliwell. And years later, she began to write booklets about her experiences in our seance room. And just recently, she's combined the 3 booklets into one book. And here it is. It's called Touching the Next Horizon. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because within the book, she's specifically written it for people who know very little about physical mediumship. And she explains the phenomena step by step. Also, she's a very gifted artist. And within the book, people will find there are many, many diagrams of the phenomena that take place within the seances. But more than that, there is also links within the book to recordings of the spirit people speaking. So anyone who gets the book will know how to access those recordings. And it's well worth a read. It's very, very good. She's combined the 3 into one, and she's also updated the original 3.
That's great. And it's called The Next Horizon.
Touching the Next Horizon. And the subtitle is Experiences of Trance and Physical Mediumship with the Stewart Alexander Circle. And the author is Katie Halliwell.
That's great. I'll make sure there's links below to get access to that as well.
No, I was saying that, until I was 22 years of age, I knew virtually nothing about spiritualism. And in the years and years and years that have passed, people said to me so many times, why don't you write a book, about your experiences? And I always said, no, I'm not interested, because, I understand if the skeptics and the cynics say, well, he's agreed to be interviewed, blah, 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 blah. But I say again that I'm not interested in publication, in putting myself before the public, not in the least. And the only reason I agreed to interviews is because it was repeatedly pointed out to me it was an opportunity to speak about my book, and therefore to get the message of survival and communication out into the world, And I think at the present time, with the world being in the state it's in, that, as I said previously, if only people understood and realized that death is the doorway into the eternal life, that communication is possible between the 2 states of existence, we would be living in a different world. We certainly would be living in a different world, And I think it's so sad that so many people out there, know very little, if anything, about this reality, So,
that's true.
What more can I say?
Yeah, the skeptics will finally realize it at one point.
Oh yeah, when they pass over.
Exactly. When they transition, they'll say, "Oh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Dear, oh dear. Yeah.
yeah,
But yeah, it's been a long journey, and it's been a very, very interesting journey. But I have also to say that, there's a great deal of responsibility involved when we run guest circles or anything of that kind. And people say to me, "What do you mean there's responsibility? It's nothing to do with you. It's the spirit world." But I say, look, any human being, in this situation would want people to experience the very best, and therefore it is a responsibility. And I ask the spirit world, for goodness sake, do everything you can, to demonstrate your reality, which is silly for me to say that because I know they do that anyhow,
right.
but it is a responsibility, definitely.
Absolutely."
You ask, how does one become a medium? And the answer is, honestly, I have no more idea than anyone else has. Now, there are claims, we know this, that, if a person chooses to attend a few courses, then in some way development can be accelerated. I'm sorry, but I don't believe this. I believe that a tutor, shall we call him a tutor, providing he is knowledgeable, providing he understands and he supports, helps, guides a potential medium, then of course that can be of enormous help to a developing medium. But so often I think that people believe that they only have to attend a few courses and then they can be mediums and they can be out there demonstrating. I'm sorry, but to me, when spiritualism first commenced all those many years ago now, the home circle stood at the very center of spiritualism. It was the lifeblood, it was the heartbeat of the movement. And it is within the home circles that existed in considerable numbers all over Europe, all over England,
Right.
That is where these wonder mediums that today we can only read about, this is where they developed and where eventually, to eventually emerge to work publicly. And there is no shortcut. People can sit for years to develop, and we can't decide, oh, I want to be a mental medium, oh, I want to be a clairvoyant, oh, I want to be a physical. It's not our choice to make. All we can do is to sit in patience week after week, month after month, year after year, and leave it to the spirit world. They have the complete picture. We don't. We might think we have, but we don't,
Yeah.
So it's up to the spirit world. And unfortunately, the home circle now has been relegated, in its importance. And I think that has reflected upon the standard of mediumship today within the spiritualist movement. And unless we return to, to the home circle as being the mainstay of the movement, I think things will go from bad to worse. I really do,
Already has.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's sad, in fact, throughout my many years of involvement and the demonstrations of mediumship that I've experienced, platform mediumship, I can honestly say that perhaps only on maybe half a dozen or maybe 10 occasions when I was very impressed with the demonstration. That 10, honestly, can replace that with 200 or 300 occasions when I thought, what's going on?
Yeah.
This is supposed to be, no wonder people give up, and think it's a lot of nonsense,
Yeah.
Sad.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I just had a lot of spiritual awakening.
Is that back in 1990, I was made the archives officer for a new society which had been formed within spiritualism called the Noah's Ark Society for Physical Mediumship, because by then physical mediumship had virtually died away, which was so sad because the spiritualist movement itself was created around physical manifestations. So I became the archives officer because I've always been extremely interested in the history of spiritualism, particularly in regard to physical mediumship. So as the archives officer, I was very, very fortunate to interview, to meet with elderly spiritualists who in years gone by had sat with some of the wonder physical mediums of the past. They had sat with these mediums and witnessed the most extraordinary phenomena. And you know, when they spoke about what they had experienced, it was almost as if they were talking about something that they had experienced only the night before. Everything had remained so fresh within their minds. And at a certain point, I thought to myself, well, one by one, these elderly spiritualists were passing away, passing into the spirit world. And I thought, these wonderful stories that I've heard, they're being lost. They're being lost. And I thought, I've got to do something about this. And therefore, in the Noah's Ark Society newsletter, and it also within Spiritualism's newspapers, I appealed to senior spiritualists to make contact with me and explain that I would like them to record their experiences, and that I promised them that I would see this as a duty to ensure that their wonderful stories would always be available for present day and all future spiritualists to hear. In other words, that their experiences would not be lost once they passed into spirit. And I'm delighted to say that a great many did make contact with me, and many did, thankfully, record for me their experiences. And then I thought to myself, well, I've got to do something with these. So I created a cassette, a compilation cassette of these stories, which we made available to members of the Noah's Ark Society. And then in more recent years, I thought, well, I have to do something with these cassettes. And therefore, I created this double CD album, transferred the cassettes onto CD. That's it. That's it, Dan. Yeah. And so their stories, now all of them are no longer upon this earth. They're all in the spirit world. But I hope they're listening to what I'm saying now, because their stories will live on forever for people to enjoy in the future, to learn such a great deal about these wonderful, wonderful mediums, you know.
That's
and
great.
Although I've experienced such a great deal in my lifetime, you know, when I hear some of these stories, I think, oh my goodness, I'd give a year of my life to have been there, to have experienced. Yes, my physical mediumship is at a certain level, but some of these experiences are way beyond the level that my mediumship is at. So I would say to anybody who's interested in physical mediumship and wants to learn about these great mediums of the past, then I highly recommend Physical Seansum Recollections, the double CD album.
And how does one get this? How does one get the CDs?
Yes, well, all they have to do, put into the computer Stewart Alexander Medium, and that will take them straight to my site. And they can make direct contact with me, and then they can order them through me. Yes.
Okay, great, excellent. And what do you? So if somebody wants to buy these, how much do these cost usually?
Well, the cost, obviously, I'm talking in terms of pounds,
Right.
UK money. So they are £12.50 plus postage and packing, obviously.
Yes.
So I think it's £19 something if somebody orders from America.
All right.
I think it's about £19.75, something like that.
Anybody that orders, they can say they are watching this program, just so you know that they actually saw this. That would be great.
Yes, okay, Dan. Yeah, lovely.
And also your book, of course. So thank you, Stewart, very much for coming on Discover Your Potential.
Oh, that's been my pleasure. Incidentally, the book can be ordered through Amazon. Okay.
We will have the link down below.
Oh, thank you very much. No, it's been a real pleasure, Dan, to meet with you, to speak with you, and to give this interview. So thank you.
This is Cindy Gilman, and you're listening to Discover Your Potential. So until next time, do something nice for yourself, but do something nice for someone else.